Hello, everyone. Welcome to our installation number 7 for Pivoting 2021, Thriving with Change. We have a really interesting program today, and I think it's one that is of emerging importance, especially as we find ourselves in an interdependent world and find ourselves with skills that are being used in unusual ways. So these are energy industry supply chains. So we'll talk about critical minerals, battery minerals, technology, smart sourcing, and we'll talk not only about supply chains in terms of traditional supply chains, but also issues of ethical sourcing, provenance, and we'll also talk about technologies being used to help us be able to solve supply chain problems. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of our program, we'll have Rick Fritz, who seems to be running a little bit late today. I know we've had to have a lot of updates. So we have Gretchen Gillis, our president-elect, who will ask to speak. And Meredith Faber is our DPA president, and she'll be here shortly. And Julian Chenin, who's our sustainability committee member, he's here. And then our program is have an informal brief presentations with conversation. Lyle Trytten and Giga Metals, battery minerals, supply chains. Michael Campbell, I2M, uranium and rare earth supply chains. Alex Tardesilla, and sourcing and post-contract awards management. Meredith Faber, DPA, professional development and diversification. And we also have a new technology showcase, Tom Smith, U.S. Strategic Minerals Exploration, critical minerals exploration and supply chains. And then finally, we'll have audience discussion and networking. And I'd like to mention also that we have our Zrathus collaboration platform. So I'd like to encourage everyone to go ahead and sign up for Zrathus. Look in the chat box and you'll see, I'll put a note in there. It's XRATHUS. And it's an opportunity for us to continue the conversation, also have challenges and collaborations. So here's our team challenge with supply chains. So anyway, so what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Rick Fritz, if he is here, and if he is not, I'd like to ask Gretchen Gillis to say a few words. I don't see Rick. So Gretchen, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Thank you, Susan. I'm sitting here in my kitchen in Houston, Texas with Dave Cook, AAPG honorary member and former VP Regions. And we're delighted to be here. And I think so many of the topics that you just mentioned, Susan, are unfamiliar. And it seems like a sign of the times. I was actually talking to David Curtis this morning and kind of saying, I feel like information is just, avalanching on me. And yet, Dave and I have sat through some really interesting webinars related to supply chain and critical minerals and so on. And so, yes, I think there's a lot for everybody to learn. So I'm here happily looking forward to hearing from the interesting group that you've assembled. I will say that I really appreciate AAPG being an environment where we can all learn from each other. And so just these informal gatherings that you've been doing, Susan, are really terrific. I'd like to also say that if you know people who should be engaged in AAPG and some of these efforts that we have, like critical minerals, like discussing geothermal, like discussing carbon capture and sequestration, please invite them to join us, because the more the merrier. And, we're a member-driven organization, and so it's really good to have a lot of participation. I see that Rick has just shown up.
Yes.
I'm not sure what his background is. It's not the Dolomites. So I'm gonna call an audible and throw it over to Rick.
Thank you. Hi, Rick.
Thanks, Gretchen. Sorry, the Zoom update. Gee, and it wouldn't update. So it got me. But anyhow, welcome everybody. This is going to be a lot of fun tonight. I look forward to it. One of the things we're trying to do is figure out where the jobs are. where the jobs are. And so we're looking at geothermal, we're looking at hydrogen, we're looking at rare earth minerals. Rare earth minerals is interesting because I just wonder how many, the last mine to be approved in the United States was about 10 years ago. So as far as I know, a copper mine. So, how is the approval process going to be, at least in the US? And I know that's a US centric question, but, and how many deposits are there? I mean, based on my review, there's about 400 metal mines right now in the US, and how many geologists does it actually take to run 400 mines? So where the jobs are going to be a big deal in all these. I mean, we can certainly see that CCUS is going to be, they're throwing a lot of money at that, and that's going to have some job opportunities down the line. But the one thing I take out of a lot of this that I think I should point out to those younger than I is that from in the 50s, there were pretty good jobs, and in the oil business, and then from 58 to 72, it was in the doldrums, and there weren't. If you weren't doing petroleum, you could teach or you could do some water, but there wasn't a lot of there just weren't a lot of jobs for geologists. And then from about 84 to 2002, we were in the doldrums again, and it was pretty tough. Same thing. It just wasn't a lot of other opportunities. You really had to look pretty hard. But what excites me about this time, this downturn, number one is oil is at $60 a barrel. That's kind of a funny downturn. But the other is there's so many other opportunities for geoscientists. Geoscientists are we're very flexible. We're multitaskers. We're experts on a little bit of everything. And so what I see is not a negative. I see tremendous opportunity during this time period. So jobs will come, I believe. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you. Really appreciate that. And it's very encouraging. So I'd like to introduce Meredith Faber, and she's DPA president. So just say a few words.
Hello, sorry for my tardiness. I had to do a Zoom update, which I imagine that some of you may have had to do as well. So my name is Meredith Faber. I'm the president of the Division of Professional Affairs. I just want to thank Susan for inviting me to this supply chain webinar, and I'm curious to see what everyone else has to say about this subject.
Wonderful. And finally, I'd like to introduce Julian Chenin, who's with our sustainability committee, and a lot of the issues that have to do with supply chains do revolve around sustainability. So kind of appropriate. Welcome, Julian.
Oh, thank you for having me, Susan, and good evening, morning, and afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And again, thanks for putting on such a wonderful event. I'm from the Sustainable Development Committee. So our mission is to really communicate the positive technical, economic, as well as environmental and social benefits of the petroleum industry and sort of its collective efforts towards that. And we're not just made of those in industry, but also in academia from a global perspective. So we want to really encourage and incorporate that global sense and understand how everything links into each other, such as supply chain. And so I'm really excited for today's webinar because I feel like Rick Fritz said, there's so much going on in this downturn and there's so much innovation happening, but how do we link that all together and how can the geoscience adapt towards that? And we're doing a lot of work in the Sustainable Development Committee exposing how the geoscientists can get involved in geothermal, CCUS. And so we're really excited to hear more about it today.
Oh, thank you. So I'm very happy to be able to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Lyle Trytten from Giga Metals. He's here from Canada, and he's going to talk to us about battery minerals and supply chains. So I'd like to invite you to share your screen. And
excellent. I'm just looking for my.
I think I need to make you.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I just had to get my PowerPoint actually up and running and find it. There it is.
Great.
Okay, thanks. Sorry about that little blip there. So thanks, everybody. By way of background, I'm not a geologist or a geoscientist. I'm an engineer in an oil province, Alberta, Canada. But I've spent my career in the metal side of the whole resource business. And currently I'm working with a company, I run my own consulting, but I'm working with a company called Giga Metals that's advancing a nickel project, which is critical for battery materials. And through my career, I've worked on operations and projects, but I finished my corporate career at Shared International as the general manager for sustainability. So I totally hear where you're coming from, Julian. How we deal with the environment and the people and everything else is becoming increasingly important, and much more so in these critical minerals areas, especially for batteries, than it ever has been for oil. So it should be an interesting discussion. Let's make sure that advances. Just to be clear, this is my presentation, not Giga's presentation, so I haven't given it to them to clear. But I wanted to start off just with a very brief overview of where we are in lithium-ion batteries. For those of us who've been in the space a while, it's old hat, but for those of you who haven't been, we always talk about lithium with these batteries, and lithium is important. It's the energy transfer agent within the battery that shuttles back and forth between the anode and the cathode from charging to discharging cycles. The cathode materials comprise a variety of metals. So Tesla uses nickel, cobalt, aluminum, and so-called NCA batteries. A lot of manufacturers are using NMC or nickel, manganese, cobalt batteries. Some Chinese, and now Volkswagen has announced that in Europe, they'll use iron phosphate, LFP batteries in their entry-level vehicles. LCO is old tech. That's what's powering your laptop right now, probably, and your phone, lithium cobalt oxide. And there are others. So there's a variety of cathode materials available that all have different properties. And there typically is one type of anode right now. It's a porous graphite carbon, but there are various tweaks that are done to that to make it more suited and to increase the energy density of the batteries. And they're talking about moving to silicon and lithium metal batteries in the future, but there's a lot of physical problems with those, just around how they handle the changes that come along with moving the lithium ions in and out, and growth of dendrites and swelling and all those kinds of things. Battery technology is advancing rapidly, but at the core of it, the chemistry of it hasn't actually changed an awful lot in quite a long time. It's lithium going back and forth between a graphite and some metal oxide kind of cathode material. When we talk about batteries, you get confused because there's a lot of different ones out there. And why are there so many? Why haven't we standardized on one? Well, the issue is that every different battery chemistry comes with a different set of trade-offs around cost or lifespan, or how much energy it can hold, how fast it can deliver that power back out. And so manufacturers make choices around the battery technology that they use to deliver the set of performance parameters that they want. So LFP, for example, is a great battery as long as you don't want a really big range in your vehicle. Great for an entry-level commuter vehicle, not really great for a big Tesla SUV that you want to drive 700 kilometers in. You can't put a big enough battery in there using that chemistry. NCA and NMC have a higher specific energy. They can hold more in power in them, and so that gives you the range. So those are really premium batteries. So when we talk about the supply chains in this space, in the battery space, it's a fairly long chain, and I've simplified it here quite a bit. You have a mining company that does some things at the front end. They mine the ore. You got to have a mine, or you got to, in our case at Giga, we have to go and make a mine. That's a long project, as Richard noted. It's been a little while since there've been a lot of mine developments in the US. Canada's had more, but it's a slow process in the developed world. It's faster in some third world or developing countries. Once you mine the ore, then you've got to process it at a site in order to get something that's saleable and transportable. And then you have to take it further and refine it to a fairly high degree of purity, which can be done within the confines of the mining company. Might be a separate company involved there in transforming that material through the refining process. Then we make precursor cathode materials, and then we bring in all the other precursor cathode materials. So for example, if this was the supply chain for nickel, you'd also be bringing in cobalt and manganese as other precursors to mix together in the CAM stage to make the cathode active materials. And that's a very, these are all specialized processes, but you're trying to get a very specific set of characteristics out of your cathode active materials that then go into assembling the battery, along with all the wiring and packaging and everything else. A lot of copper comes in here that then finally goes to get stuck into an electric vehicle. And there's a number of parties involved along the way. Typically, you have a mining company, maybe a refining company. You have somebody who's making the precursors, somebody who's making the cathode active materials, and battery assembly is usually in the same place. And then finally, the electric vehicle manufacturer. But what we're starting to see now is more and more integration and joint venturing. So people are reaching further back up the chain. Battery companies are starting to reach back towards having mining resources available to them. Car companies are starting to reach somewhat back up the chain in order to secure their supply, make sure that they have what they want with the characteristics that they want. And that's really critical with these supply chains. So, let's talk about these issues. Right now there's a lot of debate in the US and here in Canada and in the European Union about security of supply. And we've been saying this, those of us in the nickel business have been saying this for a long time. There hasn't been a significant new nickel deposit found in a long time. The market is becoming increasingly dominated by Chinese state interests. And if you want to make sure that you have the supply of nickel to meet your strategic purposes, you may not want to just rely on the open markets to do that. You might want to actually lock that up in some fashion, because you need to get the right product for your battery at the right time. And if you end up in the market and can't get your precursors, sorry, you're not making electric vehicles. And that is really going to skewer a Tesla or a Volkswagen or somebody else who's banking on a large scale change. Within each of these materials, there's a variety of ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues that have to be addressed. Some are, it's more important to some consumers than others, but I think everybody recognizes that having a very high ESG performance would be good. Whether people are willing to pay for it, that's another matter. But we have to think about carbon footprint. That's coming into play in the EU now with their new battery regulation that's actually going to start carbon footprinting batteries for electric vehicles. Other kinds of pollution, air and water pollution, biodiversity impact. Oil drilling typically doesn't damage a lot of surface. Mines take away a lot of surface, both with the mine and the tailings facilities. And that can have a significant impact on biodiversity, depending how it's managed. And of course, management of those tailings. And that's one of the areas where, people looking to transition with a geology or geoscientist background, there's a lot of work to come on the mining end of things with both the mining and managing the tailings. We need to do better than we've done in the past. Social performance, we all know, is important, but it's dealt with differently in different jurisdictions, of course. I work in Canada where our environmental approval process brings into play the social aspect as well. It requires us to do consultations with local communities and Indigenous groups and stuff. That's not the norm everywhere, but companies that understand the business are doing this regardless of where they work. Corruption is an issue in some countries, so governance issues matter. And really, for any company, transparency is pretty important. You got to be able to say what you're doing. Everybody's interested in us and in the footprint we leave behind us, both in the negatives and in the positives, how much we contribute to our communities. So those are all important. We, of course, have to think about the cost of supply within the supply chain, but that is maybe not as critical a factor as it used to be. We work in a commodity business. We're used to thinking the price is set. This is what it is. It's traded on the LME or it's West Texas Intermediate or whatever. The reality is that there is some differentiation based on the quality of your product, whether that's a chemical quality or an ESG quality, and that may become a bigger thing in the future. So let's have a quick look at the nickel supply chain, just because it's my area of expertise. Nickel today is primarily used in stainless steel, 70% of the market. So we've got a market of about 2.4 million tons of nickel every year. About half of that is produced through Chinese associated facilities, and about half of it is produced in a form that is not really suitable for direct conversion into batteries. We use nickel in an impure form for stainless steel and in a pure form for high nickel alloys and batteries and chemistry uses. So nickel is about half and half produced in the impure and the pure forms. The growth market is going to be batteries. That's clear, regardless of announcements here and there about changing battery chemistry and stuff. This is the big growth market in the nickel business. This is a study just put out by Roskill at the end of last year, actually early this year, it should say 2021, that related to consumption of EVs in the European market, but they were looking at the global nickel market. And the growth expected from today to 2040 is pretty significant, as you can see. We're talking about a market that might well be double today's market. And it's a really fair question as to where does that nickel come from? I don't actually have answers for you because it's going to be difficult to bring that many new mines into production in that kind of a timeline. If you want to do this all in North America, you better have started permitting those mines a decade ago because it's going to be tough. 10 years is not an unreasonable estimate to bring a mine into production from when you really start working on it. Some deposits have been around 50 years and they're not mines yet, right? So we know some of the information, but there is more work to be done. When we think about the ESG issues and the supply issues, I put these two charts together last week just to guide some thought around this. The nickel is produced globally, but more than half of it comes out of China and Indonesia. And you have to think that there's a risk factor there if we continue to escalate trade disputes. If China wants to control the market for their own purposes, that might cause problems for those of us in North America and the European Union. Canada and Russia used to be the biggest producers, but we're not anymore. And then I went through and looked at all the producers in the world and where they're located in terms of potential governance issues and the processing technologies they use, and rated the amount of production that falls into different levels of ESG concern. And let me be, this isn't directly related to the country mix, but that does come into it. And it is possible to run an excellent ESG project in a difficult jurisdiction. That's very doable. It's just hard, right? I worked for a company that had a multi-billion-dollar project in Madagascar, one of the most corrupt nations on earth. We did it well, but it wasn't easy. Just because we have concerns doesn't mean that poor practices are followed, but it does make your life harder. And it does mean that as an end consumer, you need to put more effort into doing the due diligence on your supply chain to ensure that you're not getting caught with material that's got a very high carbon footprint or was made with child labor or slave labor or whatever, right? There are many, many factors at play there. So, the key components, as I see it for supply chain, is you need to get the materials you need when you need them. And that's a strategy discussion more now than it ever has been. There's always been an assumption that the commodity market is global and you can just get what you want. I'm not convinced that that's true going forward, given the increasing level of trade disputes that we have. It's very clear that the Chinese have been, companies and state-owned enterprises have been able to build a lot of nickel supply in the last decade. Western capital and our Western paradigm of how to go about projects is not delivering growth. State actors have advantages on certain things, and we have to recognize that. If you want to go to the markets to finance a new IT project that's going to deliver the newest whatever to all the millennials, you can get $1 billion. But if you want to go and finance a mine, it's not so easy. We need to validate the ESG credentials for the supply chains that we have. And right now, there's a lot of different systems for that with a lot of different criteria. Different consumers care about different things, but we need to streamline these. And that's going to be a difficult challenge, whether it's OECD or the Responsible Minerals Institute or the Metals Institutes themselves, or I don't really care, but we need to have 1 or 2 systems that we have to conform to, not 10 or 20. We hear a lot about the ESG criteria right now around batteries, and lithium, nickel, and cobalt dominate the discussions. Lithium because of production in China, but also because of the production in the Atacama Desert in Chile and Argentina, Bolivia, and water issues. Nickel because a lot of it's produced in Indonesia. Cobalt out of the Democratic Republic of Congo. But I don't actually hear anybody talking about the same level of ESG concern around manganese and iron and aluminum and copper, which also all go into the batteries. Do we care about the whole footprint, or do we only care about certain things? I think that's an open question. And we have to ask and answer how relevant that is to both our current stakeholders and our future stakeholders. I think people will care more in the future. And lastly, we have to manage the cost. So nickel trades at about $7.50 a pound right now, US. Increase that cost by $3 a pound. That's only $300 for a new car with a high nickel battery pack. It's actually not a dominant driving force. So I believe EV manufacturers can afford to pay more for high ESG materials. Whether they're willing to is a question yet to be seen. So last, just 20 seconds on Giga Metals. We've got a project. We want to build a big project in northern BC, hydro-powered, very low carbon footprint. 37,000 tons a year of nickel will go a long ways. But when we think about the gaps that are coming, needing 2 to 3 million tons a year of nickel additional production, we'd need 40 of these, 50, 60 new mines this scale. That's a huge undertaking, and that's the level of challenge that's facing the industry right now. So I'll leave it off there and pass control back.
Thank you. That's really wonderful, and really segues well to our next one. We'll save the questions to the end. We have some really good questions in the chat, but we'll go ahead and have the presentations first. So our next presenter is, want to make sure we have it the right, is Michael Campbell, and he's here to talk to us about rare earths and uranium. And Michael Campbell is an EMD, so that's our Energy Minerals Division.
Thank you. All right, I don't see anybody, but let's back up one here. Oh, damn. Can you see me all right?
I can see you. Do you have any slides that you're going to show?
Hang on a second. Okay. Where are we?
There's a green square.
Okay. I want us. Well, I've got my slides up.
You need to click share screen.
I don't see the share screen here. Hang on.
There's a green, you'll have to mouse over some of it. Sometimes it's at the bottom.
Hang on. Yeah, I'm coming along here.
There we go. Great. Excellent.
Okay. All right. Let's go back where we were. Sorry for all this dumbing around. I get used to this stuff here. All right. Can you see me?
Well, we saw it and then you lost it. We lost the screen again.
Okay.
They need to reshare.
Okay. I tried to put the pointer on and it didn't seem to want to come on here. Hang on a second. One moment, please. Okay. I think we got it here.
Yeah, I think you need to move there you go. Okay. So don't worry about the pointer.
Okay. Okay. We there?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to talk about uranium and rare earth supply chains. First of all, let's talk about uranium. Over here on the left, of course, you begin with mining, and that means either in situ mining or open pit or underground mining. With respect to what kind of material we have, there's plenty of uranium that lasts for hundreds of years, contrary to the naysayers. There's plenty, mostly roll fronts in the US. And if we need anything more, there's plenty of uranium raw product in Canada and Australia. We've been trying to get away from the foreign involvement outside of Canada and Australia, of course, because of a lot of that supply can be uncertain. As you can see here, in the past years, we've been getting most of our uranium from Russia during before 2019. The long story there we'll talk about one day. But more recently, the US government has gotten involved and starting to aim a lot of the production at American mines. But just having uranium is a long way from running a reactor. So you go through a rather complex chain of events here. And first of all, you've got to turn the uranium into something, a product in yellow cake that has mostly U-238 and very little U-235 into at least 3% of U-235 that is built into the reactor pellets that load reactors these days. And that goes through a couple of processes. First of all, you got to go through what's called their fabrications, and you'll notice that has been foreign groups before, but more recently they're building into U.S. area. But that is going to take a while to get used to it. Okay.
Lost him.
Michael, I think you're muted. We lost you.
I think his Zoom quit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I saw that screen.
I know. Well, okay, so why don't we just go ahead and see if he can share it later. We'll go ahead and Alex, you want to go ahead with yours?
Sure.
I'll send Michael a chat.
Can everybody?
Zoom is killing everybody today.
Yeah. Susan, can you
so
see my
much for their
screen?
Update.
Now, Susan, can you?
Your audio is going out. You might, oh. Okay,
How's that? Can you hear me?
yes,
Awesome. How's that? Can you hear me now?
perfect.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Tartasella. And like my neighbor Lyle, who I just met right now, I'm also from Alberta, from Canada. And I want to present on the role of contracts management in geothermal energy projects and how do we mitigate the risk. Just a background, I have 15 years of experience in the upstream side of the oil and gas industry and would like to transition eventually into geothermal. At the moment, I'm taking a certificate course with under Susan's program, the Geothermal Basics, offered by the AAPG, and really enjoying that and learning a lot. So let me just start this. Okay. Probably a lot of you are aware that there's a global pivoting from fossil fuels to renewable energy, and it basically was formally launched, in my opinion, back in 2015 when 129 or so countries signed up on the UN Paris Agreement, and that is its objective is to reduce greenhouse emissions by 2050. Followed by that, there's been a lot of divestments in the oil patch. For example, here in Canada, Shell Corporation sold its assets in the oil sands, or as Americans like to refer to it as the tar sands. As well, Norway divested its investments with the major producers such as ExxonMobil, Shell. And of course, famously, this past January, newly elected President Joe Biden revoked the Keystone XL pipeline permit, which was a $16 billion investment by the Alberta government to have that pipeline completed. Other pivoting from fossil fuels is that the government of Canada formally passed the renewable energy legislation, which led to its funding of a geothermal project in Saskatchewan, one of our provinces here. It's called Deep Geothermal Project. And I think they're in their final feed now of that project and be able to produce some electricity to about, to supply electricity to about 3,000 homes in Saskatchewan. Also in 2020, there was a formal program called the Pivot 2020 from the oil patch to geothermal, and that attracted a lot of the workers, especially those who are been impacted by the global pandemic. People are now looking to transition from the oil patch into renewable energy, and specifically to geothermal. And finally, and I'm really excited about this, Government of Alberta finally passed the geothermal development legislation back in November 2020. And that also led to a $24 million funding by the government to a new company or a new project called the Alberta No. 1 Geothermal Project in Greenview, Alberta, which is just northwest of Calgary. I would say about 8 hours, 800 kilometers northwest of Calgary. When you're looking at geothermal, first of all, because of this pivoting, one aspect that I'm really excited about is geothermal shares the same risk as the oil and gas industry, specifically, for example, for drilling and completions. So I've identified some risk here that I believe will play a major role in determining the success of geothermal projects. Number one is geological. And again, in my course, I'm finding that even though there is evidence of high temperatures, we cannot determine the consistency of that high temperature. So that's an unknown. Environmentally, if fracking is required, that exposes the project to, or the environment, the community where the project is slated to go in environmental issues. Can we avoid fracking at all to avoid causing mini tremors? For example, in South Korea, there was a case where fracking for a geothermal project had caused a minor mini tremor within the community. economic. Excuse me. Can geothermal produce electricity compete against that of natural gas? We know natural gas is very cheap. And we also know that starting a geothermal drilling project is very expensive, could be very expensive. And which brings me to the next risk of financial. Will we attract capital, either from the government? Clearly, the Canadian government is very committed to geothermal and its support of the Paris Agreement. How about from private investors? You know, I learned from the president CEO of Alberta #1 geothermal project that she says a lot of the investors are asking her, hey, how fast what is the turnaround for the return of investment for if I invest my money in geothermal? Some are saying 10 years is too long, 20 years is too long. So they're shying away from the financial side. And finally, human resources. Can we attract workers to work in geothermal? Or can we also involve members of our First Nations or Indigenous communities in geothermal projects? One major experience that I have from the oil and gas industry is the use of master service agreement, which is a formal agreement between two or more parties. For example, if Shell is drilling somewhere in Houston, they need to engage the drilling companies such as Schlumberger. So they have to have a formal agreement to engage them for their services. And their primary functions of the MSA is to articulate the expectations of the parties to the agreement. It also provides a mechanism for governance and issue of resolution. Governance in terms of environmental, HSC, health services, health, safety and environment, and also other governmental legislation. And finally, it acts as a scorecard against which to examine the performance of the service provider and the results. Oops, okay. Other ways that you can, sorry, I think I missed, okay. Other ways that you can use the MSA is to ask questions. For example, where is this project? What is the project? Where is the project located? The MSA will define these things. So it's very important to use the MSA as a tool in guiding all the stakeholders, you know, from the producing company and also the service providers. I want to identify also the risk that MSAs can address. So, for example, when you have cost overruns on the project, you can deal with it by looking at the scope of work, terms and condition, the contract change management process, dispute resolution, back charges to the vendor, to the contractor. Environmental risk or wildlife risk. I'm on a project right now with a major pipeline company where we've discovered an old sewer system is underneath the facility. So how do we mitigate that? And again, we went back to the contract and referred, for example, to the schedule, the HSE schedule, and also government legislation. So as you can see, boring as it may to deal with agreements are very critical in the success of the project. Okay. Contractor defaulting on its obligations, for example. In the contract, you can see if there's any penalties, liquidated damages, or if it's beyond discussion. How do you go about dispute resolution? Finally, another risk is schedule delays due to pandemic, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic, natural disasters like typhoons or snowstorms, or contractors declaring bankruptcy during the construction phase. Luckily, I've been on 2 projects now with this major pipeline company. We've never seen any contractor declaring bankruptcy, but if that's the case, again, these are the terms and conditions that are very critical that would help you mitigate that risk and protect the interests of the companies. I'm on the final stretch here. Post-award contracts management, that is has been my specialty in the last 15 years in the oil patch, and hopefully trying to transition to geothermal. Essentially, it's to ensure that the company and prime contractor meets their contractual obligations, to monitor and mitigate potential claims. In my first project at TC Energy, I helped the project manager avoid a possible $1 million charge to the contract because of a prime contractor's error on the invoice. So it's very simple, yet it's critical to the project's budget. Tools that we use for post-contract award management, of course, MS Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Visio. I added Visio here because when you're talking about process mapping, for example, you know, it's important, especially if you're dealing with engineers or geologists. SAP is critical for financial and cost tracking and cost control. And SAP Ariba, we use that for sourcing for services. You know, from the sourcing to the contractor's bid to the communicating with the contractors with regards to their contract exceptions. And finally, we use SAP Ariba for contracts negotiations and contracts repository. I believe that's the end. Oh, sorry. I skipped something here. Sorry about that. Okay. Anyway, that is me. I don't know if you can see the my picture there, but I will forward this a copy to Susan. And in case any one of you want to talk about contracts management, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. That was quite interesting. And I think Gretchen raised a good point that geothermal seems to be long-term, so it takes a different kind of thinking, kind of almost like offshore thinking.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm finding too in my last paper was, you know, since there's a lot of roadblocks to geothermal here in Alberta, especially, geothermal can partner with natural gas or solar and what's the other, solar and wind, to be able to provide that base load energy. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. And just a quick plug. So thank you, Alex, for mentioning the course. Dr. Carlo Dietel of Germany, he's a geothermal expert. He's actually, and he's an AAPG member, European region. He's teaching the course, and people are really enjoying it.
So much, yeah, so much so that there's two other Canadians from Nova Scotia who is looking at the potential of geothermal, you know, for greenhouses and what have you. Yeah, so
that's
good.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I've in the chat, Michael Campbell let me know that he had a power surge. They have a storm going on. So anyway, so I think Michael, if you can do like a really quick version, and then I'll also record you separately, so we'll have a standalone too.
Let me get this back on here.
Thanks everybody for the patience with
Sorry
Zoom
about
thunderstorms.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen now.
Where are you based, Michael?
What? Houston.
Ah, Houston. Okay.
Yeah, I just had a big storm go by and knocked the dickens out of us here. Okay. Okay.
So yeah, if you could just give us an abbreviated version, and then I'll get with you and we can record a full one separately, and I'll make it available.
Yeah, it looks like this thing is still screwy. They must have done something with the program.
Yeah, let's just do. Why don't we? I'll offline. I'll get in touch
Okay.
with you tomorrow or the next day. We can record
Okay.
one,
All
and
right.
I'll upload it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it'll be better. Between the storm and Zoom's updates, it's like.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Well, so Meredith, I'd like to have a chance to introduce you. Meredith Faber is the president of Division of Professional Affairs, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about the profession and careers.
Yes, so I promised Susan that I would have a presentation all prepared, and then I didn't do it. So instead, what we're going to do is, if you all will permit me to talk off the cuff, I'm going to do that for my 5 minutes instead. But basically, to go off of what Lyle, Michael, and Alex was saying, you have a lot of working parts when it comes to putting together a business. And a lot of with those working parts comes with the people who have to make the working parts go. And so dealing with those people and the various nuances of what each other's roles are and the responsibilities that each person has, there's a lot of professional negotiating that one has to do. And so my roles previously have been on onshore operations and development as a geoscientist. And so working with engineers and land and royalty owners and various different kinds of completion engineers. Every single type of person has a different kind of expertise that they bring to the enterprise, and dealing with all of these people is one kind of thing you have to negotiate in your professional career, because each not only function within a business unit, but also each individual has their own type of communication format, and how they like to do their particular business may not necessarily be how like you like to do your business. And so making sure that you can effectively make a compromise between the two of you, or between two teams, or between two business units, or between two companies, as the case might be in Alex's example, is highly important to making sure that you have a very positive outcome for whatever project that you're working on. And so a lot of what we do in the Division of Professional Affairs is talk about items such as ethics and professional conduct, how one should comport themselves in a given situation, especially a business situation. And a lot of this has to do with the mechanics of what goes into maintaining ethical compliance. So the Code of Ethics for the AAPG stipulates how members should conduct themselves. A lot of these concern things like don't cheat on your friend's prospect to another company and things like that. But which is all certainly important, but not necessarily something that may come up when everyone's day to day. But one of those things that I think is important to everyone is dealing with everyone fairly and justly, and acknowledging that we live in a very diverse world, and there are very diverse opinions that go along with that worldview. And so this is why I, at least in my presidency, have been pushing the recognition of diversity, inclusion, and equity, and within not only professional societies, but in business. Within the corporate sector, there's been a large amount of recognition of the importance of this, because the greater amount of DEI that you have, diversity often builds greater innovation. You end up with better ideas, lots of more cost-effective ideas, and making sure that you capitalize on that, the people that can offer you those kind of bonuses, let's say, to your employee base, is a highly effective way of building your company towards a growth profile. So when you have a kind of stagnant look at the way kind of professional societies have maybe conducted themselves in the past, we have a very kind of flat way of saying, like, just do good things and everything will be fine. Well, yes, that's true. but also we need to take into account that everybody's idea of what fine looks like might look different. And so one of the things that we're working on within the Division of Professional Affairs is making sure that we have a very broad understanding of what DEI means and how we can integrate it into our policies and our procedures, and making sure that we can also offer that as something to our members and to the association at large. I'm also working with the Stimulating Equity and Diversity Special Interest Group within AAPG to facilitate this. So one of the things I wanted to mention to this group is that for our joint meeting that we'll be having in December, the DPA will be sponsoring a luncheon by AGU Senior Vice President Billy Williams, who is the Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity Officer for that particular organization, who's going to talk about bystander intervention and how someone can be an active participant and making sure that DEI is at the forefront of our business practices, and making sure that the way that we conduct ourselves within a particular space is in accordance with DEI, and that we have a recognition of that when we walk into a new project, a new team, any kind of new business scenario. Same thing with any kind of personal scenario, because everybody has a different space and you're not always going to be aware of what one person's circumstances are given your own. The other thing I wanted to point out is, and I'll go ahead and share my screen, is if you're somebody who is in a position of needing any kind of ethics courses, we do have those available on the DPA website, and I'll go ahead and post that link in the chat as well. But anybody who is currently in need of a professional development hour for an ethics course for either their geoscience licensure or their board certification through DPA, these courses are offered free of charge for those members of AAPG, and you can go ahead and there's a for each of them, there is an accompanying quiz that you can take to solidify your understanding of the ethics course and to complete your certification. So if that's something that you're in need of this year, when there's not a lot of external offerings, or if you're unable to find an ethics course online, that's certainly something that we can offer you here. And we're looking to record more of these to make them, to broaden the availability of them to more people. But that's the essential components that I wanted to talk about.
That's great.
I think it's right at 8 o'clock, which I think should be more in line with the timeline we were looking for.
That's good.
But certainly,
Yes.
if you have any questions about DPA, go ahead and hit me up. Happy to share our email address with you, and let me know if you have any questions.
Oh, that's perfect. And Gretchen Gillis has mentioned in the chat, for many companies and associations, DEI is a professional and ethical imperative. I'm glad to see DPA addressing this. So thank you for that comment. So Meredith has posted a link and also an email. So thank you. That's great.
My pleasure.
So I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to introduce our technology showcase, and it has to do with critical minerals. And so we have Thomas Smith of U.S. Strategic Minerals and Exploration, and Thomas is out of Denver, I believe. And I'd like to invite you to share your screen.
All right, let's see if this will work. No thunderstorms up here, but share that. And let's see if we can get going here. How's that look?
It's good. You might want to turn up your volume a bit if you can.
Okay. Do that. How about that? Any better?
It's about the same. So use your outdoor voice.
All right. Well, appreciate Susan, the invite. Honored to be included in your webinar here. U.S. Strategic Minerals Exploration, a small company out of Denver, Colorado area. we're strategically focused on minerals exploration. So minerals of all kinds, oil being one, helium being one, calcium being one, um, some of the lithium, rubidium, different rare earths that are critical. So we're kind of involved in a lot of things that folks have been talking about tonight, including geothermal. So let's get on with it here. So as I mentioned, we were founded in Denver by 6 veteran oil and gas professionals. I'm an engineer. We've got a couple geophysicists, geologists, chemical engineer, landman. So kind of a bunch of retreads looking for something to do. Most of us been around for 40 years, so we've seen it, from the early 80s, late 70s on through. But uniquely, we take that all of the above approach, or the hybrid approach, to exploring for minerals and producing minerals. And we use this approach to address a couple of global challenges. And the first one, obviously, the economic effects of climate change caused by carbon emissions in greenhouse gases. And secondly, and more importantly here, is the foreign dominance of critical minerals and rare earth supply chains. So as was mentioned earlier, a lot of things coming out of Australia and South America being processed in China and eventually making their way back to the US. And as we all know, that's really not a good business model. Our business models are basically targeting naturally occurring brine reservoirs. So a brine reservoir can be looked at by most geologists as a dry hole, and engineers as well. And importantly, though, I think we all understand that absent the shale reservoirs, the historical structural reservoirs that we all worked in the early 80s, 90s, were typically underlain by a water leg, and that water leg can be actually a mineral resource that's actually under production in many cases. So you're already dealing with the oil and the water that's coming up with the oil. So that can be a revenue stream, and I'm going to show you how that works. And including mining waste ponds and waste streams from other industries that have minerals dissolved in the brines. One of our business models is related to safe and sustainable roads, and that has to do with a project in Utah that has in the Paradox Basin. A lot of you are familiar with the Paradox Basin, unique in a lot of ways, but it can produce brines that can be used directly out of the wellbore for a number of commercial uses. And I won't go into a lot of that right now. But secondly, a business model that's key that we've been talked about tonight is the carbon capture processing technologies. Instead of just storing them the carbon underground, the CO2, which a lot of companies are looking at doing, and for maybe later use as EOR, we're looking at actually making product like road base and actually processing this in a semi-mining fashion to make saleable products and actually try to commercialize this technology. We're also looking at to strategically look at exploration for new brine reservoirs, and looking at the water analysis is really our toolkit. And as we all, most of us engineers, always dealing with disposal water, water injection. We know what the cations and the anions are in these water that are produced along with the oil and gas. And so by using an ex situ mineral carbonation process, we can actually combine the water with the CO2 and other reagents that are many times actually waste products that are available nearby, and lock away CO2 in a sequestration mode in like a calcium carbonate that could be used as a road base, or a limestone, basically, is what calcium carbonate is, as you geologists know, I'm sure. Now, Rockware is a product, has a product called Rockworks, used quite well, fits in pretty well for the modeling and actually sourcing out and building a database and mapping that for potential sites where we might have a high concentration of a specific mineral we're targeting. So as far as carbon footprint reduction, that's kind of a very important topic right now for big companies and small companies as well. And we do have technology that some of it is in patent process and patent pending, but it assists these high carbon emitting industries in trying to reduce their carbon footprint. And we continue to develop these CCUS technologies that can be adapted to heavy industry and power generation where you have high carbon emissions, such as a coal burning power plant, natural gas burning power plant, a cement plant, oil and gas refineries and gas plants. Uniquely, though, most oil and gas fields and mining sites where you have CO2 nearby, logistically connected, there are wastewaters present in big volumes. You know, a lot of oil and gas fields I've worked over the years, it's been a couple 100,000 barrels a day. And that's a big volume. That can sequester a lot of CO2. So that gives you that scale that's necessary to actually move the needle in this whole carbon capture movement. And so given the logistics of your feedstocks being close by, that helps drive the cost of the product down so you can actually maybe break even or make a decent return on your product that you're selling at the end of the day. And I guess what kind of products are we actually selling? That would be a specific example would be precipitated calcium carbonate. So PCC, or ground calcium carbonate, which is the mining version of that, when you precipitate calcium carbonate out of a brine into a calcite crystal, it's actually a very valuable specialty mineral. And it has a wide range of marketability at high dollars per ton compared to low grade stuff you might use as a road building material. And so it's used in paper stiffener and whitener. The calcium is the calcium carbonate, and also in paint base. It's a very pure white product, and also in pharmaceutical grades for high price. What is our hybrid exploration and production approach, really? And really, it's what we've all been kind of doing, you know, independently. You know, the miners do it one way, the oil and gas guys do it one way, but reality is we're all looking for we're all producing minerals, and we're all trying to explore for economically produced minerals. That's the name of the game. Oil is a mineral. So the last mineral crisis we had was in the late 70s and the 80s. And that was the Arab oil embargo. And now 40 years later, we're a net exporter of oil and natural gas, and we all should take a bow for that. But we get slapped around all of a sudden in 2020, prices drop out, to the bottom. We're too good at what we did. But now let's resolve this. Let's solve this new crisis. At the same time, let's keep that fossil fuel power alive and well, because we all know that it's necessary. We need an all of the above approach for energy. What we do need, though, in this crisis that we have now, in this supply chain issue, is we need capital infusion from the 13-member oil and gas climate initiative group and other large corporations. We really need to promote these technologies that use rare and critical minerals from oil field brines and industrial waste sites in the United States. So really, it's a recycle issue. It's a green issue. It's reclaim, reuse, and repurpose. Let's use everything that comes out of that wellbore. Every time we drill a well, we need to look at all the revenue streams, all the minerals that can possibly be produced, and run those into our economics. Okay, maybe oil is only worth $40 a barrel, but maybe you've got a brine that you can sell for, 10 or $15 a barrel. Well, it all starts adding up. And at the end of the day, if you can sequester some CO2 in the process, all the better. One way we've been able to get some funding in, and we're looking forward to a lot of this money that's out there that's been aligned with infrastructure, and you name it. I mean, it's everywhere. The DOE has a lot of these grants coming out, and it'll provide funding for kind of lab scale to field scale testing, and then ultimately commercial scale up. in partnership with some of these industries like oil and gas, cement mining, and ethanol production. And in our case, we're happy to include the Mining, Metallurgical, and Minerals Department at Colorado School of Mines up in Golden as part of our R&D team. Corby Anderson up there has been very gracious. And these partnerships, help us, get some funds to get these technologies that are specific to our mission, and basically help you solve your ESG issues. We have some solutions for that. Geothermal brines, liquid ore, I guess I should mention, liquid ore trademark is our what we call our brines. And that's, it has to do with our initial patents that were essentially written regarding the Paradox Basin, because that is so unique. Our processing and what we're doing as a company, it can be proven within the Paradox Basin really by drilling one well. And it's a very unique well called it's re-drilling the Seismosaur project up by Green River, Utah. And basically a 15,000 foot high pressure 0.99 psi per foot gradient brine well that had to be plugged because the company Gulf Canada, out of Canada obviously, didn't have a mining permit, and they were not equipped for that kind of pressure. They had 6,000 pounds at the wellhead, they had 5,000 pound equipment, and they had a hard time getting that baby plugged. But we picked up mining claims around that, and we're going to go in, we're going to twin the well, and we're going to produce a 37% nearly pure calcium chloride product, which can be used for dust control, ice control, and also for sequestering CO2 and making that purity calcite I talked about. So in other ways we can do this with liquid ore brines. A geothermal brine can technically be called a liquid ore brine. So when you have a geothermal project, you got to look at what's in that brine. You're going to be recycling this brine and taking the heat out of it. And if it's got minerals in it that are valuable, let's take them out. Let's create a truly net zero electric power source by using this technology. Another advantage of what we're talking about using the brines is to use actually oil and gas drilling techniques versus the open pit and evaporation ponds for actually processing these specialty minerals. And lithium's a good example of that. We can do direct lithium extraction processes from brines and eliminate a whole couple steps of prep that needs to happen if you're actually mining this spodumene and the different lithium raw products. So, don't ever let the government tell you, oh, we're going to pay to close these idle wellbores until you've evaluated what the mineral loads are in these brines. That's nay. That's something you don't want to do as an engineer or a geologist working these big fields that have been around forever. You've got a whole history of water analyses, and you know how much water is probably, you can calculate the reserves that you have under your leases. And then finally, there's going to be certain brines in certain areas that may have unique rare earth elements that are useful to the U.S. government and Defense Department. And so, again, mine the data, see what's in it, and target your, using all of the above approach. Target, what you have, in the ground. I'll end there. Get a hold of us. Like I say, our website's got a lot of information. We've been putting a lot of blogs out in social media, so there's a lot of additional information that I think you'll find interesting.
I love this. I'm just so glad that you're doing things with the brine. I've been so excited about that for so long, and finally, I think we're getting to a point where the technology plus the basically the zeitgeist is aligned and makes it possible.
Yeah. I think it is kind of a perfect storm for us, I think. Everything just kind of happened here in the last, even the fact that the price of oil went down, it said, well, what are you going to put your capital into, guys? Are you going to drill some more wells and make some more oil so you drive the price down further? Or do you want to take a risk and go drill a brine well? I mean, who can't drill a dry hole, right?
So your waste product is the pure water, the purified water.
That's right. Yeah, the end result, and that's true. As we take minerals out, we're left with a chlorine-rich product that we have to dispose of at the end of the day. But we're not going to dispose of it until we've taken everything out of there that has some usefulness. And I think that's the mentality we all have to take moving forward. It's just the way to do it. That's my opinion.
Well, that's great. Okay, so we have some time here for some questions. I guess the best thing to do would be to go up and look in the chat. A lot of the questions were answered in the chat. Does anybody want to read a question that seems especially interesting or compelling?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in if I can, Susan. Gretchen asked about ESG issues for attracting qualified employees. Certainly it's important. People want to know that they're, in a sense, doing good, or many people do. And that's certainly a key focus. The first discussion I had when I was looking at actually contracting with Giga Metals was with the CEO about the relationship with the indigenous peoples in the area, because I wasn't going to join a company that was not treating them properly, right? And I might not be as sensitive as some people, but it's important. And so I think it is critically important here in North America and in Europe. I don't think it's as important overseas in developing countries. People are looking for jobs, right? People are looking for anything, any way to do a little bit better. So you deal with what you have in the situation you're in, and I would never blame somebody in the Congo or South Africa or Indonesia or Brazil for having a different attitude towards it than we do.
Thank you. Let's see. I see a new message down here. Patrick had an interesting observation. Okay, so Dan, you want to open your microphone and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thomas, that was really interesting. That's good food for thought. Fantastic. It hadn't even occurred to me, but have there been studies showing that brine mining is feasible and economic in known petroleum basins like, the Permian and other places? Do we know that there's an economic opportunity being lost? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think one of in Canada, actually just north of the U.S. border of North Dakota, in Saskatchewan, there's a project that's actually doing from an oil field scenario using those brines that have, I think it's 100, 150 ppm lithium dissolved in the water, and they're actually moving forward with a project to extract lithium carbonate, I believe, and precipitate that. Now, the alkaline earth carbonates it's a well-known process. People do it, like I say, trying to get calcite. They do it for different reasons. Sometimes the unique thing we're doing is actually using a brine that has the calcium in it. A lot of times people will have to do a wash. They'll take like recycled concrete that has a lot of calcium in it and cement, and they'll wash it with a reagent that actually puts it in solution. So they have to do that prep step first, but they're still able to sequester, use CO2 to sequester into a rock that's basically making limestone. So there's a couple companies out there. A lot of them are starting to get aligned with people like Chevron and Oxy. And so, it's pretty proven. It's a simple reaction. It's basically nature's way of sequestering CO2.
I guess I'm seeing a difference between, it looks like the case for limestone and, relatively inexpensive commodities might be a proven thing, but you're also alluding a lot to lithium and rare earth elements in these brines, the real money issue. So, I would think as your business, you might have a good business model going around to petroleum companies and well owners saying, look, we'll test your stuff. We'll find out if it's economic and we'll get a royalty percentage, or we'll charge you this much to do that kind of testing. I'm just wondering what the economic opportunity is that's been proven for the battery metals in particular, not necessarily, just calcium.
Yeah, the battery metals is one that, and mainly it's going to be the lithium. I mean, we all know that cobalt and nickel aren't found in oil field brines. There's magnesium. At some point where if magnesium becomes like a grid scale battery type application, and I think something's going to have to come in instead of just lithium. Or, there's everyone wants to use lithium. Well, we all know that it just doesn't come in that kind of concentration. You're going to dig up the whole state of Nevada, and put it back, So eventually, I think, there's going to be other battery technologies that would have, if it has to do with magnesium, we're all over that. Magnesium and calcium are your common oil field brines that are ions in the brines that we can't extract using CO2.
Oh, that's good to know. So I've noticed that I was looking at our attendees. We have a good Canadian contingent. I was noticing that Louis Chavot and Alan Bertram from Canada are here also. I'm seeing some people from Mexico and also Australia. We have Lindsay Ross from Australia. And in the chat box, type where you're from. It'd be great to know. And on that question, thinking of Canada, I was going to ask Alex, in terms of the geothermal support given by the government and the fact that geothermal projects require so much capital and long-term investment, but yet it's renewable. Do you think that that's enough support from the government to actually get things going in Canada?
I think so. I think it's a good seed money for the geothermal industry. My chat with Catherine Hickson, she's the CEO of Alberta number 1. She said, look, as long as we can build this facility, that's a challenge. We've gotten the first phase, but it's securing the power purchase agreements that would guarantee the revenue. And that's why she brought up the fact of can we even compete with the natural gas people, with the TransCanadas or Enbridge of this world, because they've already got the infrastructure within Canada that delivers the natural gas. Now, here's a geothermal newcomer. She's got to put together a huge capital for drilling and building the facility. Then, yeah, I think the challenge there is to secure the customers. And I think you'll in my readings, based on my readings, Susan, that you can attract customers, like the corporate customers, the Microsoft, the Apples, who wants to buy the green energy, because they have it on their ESG saying, hey, I'm going to reduce my carbon footprint eventually. So yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah. So I'm very optimistic. Yeah.
That's good. Oh, that's wonderful.
Can I just add something there, Susan?
Yeah.
So the problem with geothermal is it's going to be high cost compared to a natural gas without carbon taxes, right? So here in Alberta, we have a decentralized power system, much like Texas. Our power costs are very low. You can buy power about 6 cents on the power market, 6 cents Canadian, that's 4.5 cents US. Geothermal is going to be like 10 cents.
Yeah.
So somebody's got to be willing to pay for that. Now, geothermal makes a lot more sense when you can also use the heat, because to run it efficiently, you end up with a low-grade waste heat byproduct at maybe 70 degrees centigrade that could be used for building heating and things like that. But if you don't have a use for that waste heat, it really detracts from the economics. And it's very jurisdictional dependent. So there's a lot of geothermal in the US right now around that sort of Nevada, California area, because there's great resources there. In Canada, there aren't great resources, right? So we're doing one in Northern Alberta, one in Southern Saskatchewan, but there aren't a lot of fantastic opportunities in Canada for it. Especially when you get into the Canadian Shield. You got to get pretty deep to get hot water.
You're right.
Yellowstone
Yeah.
would be great. Drill a bunch of holes in Yellowstone.
Yeah, that
There's one.
Lyle, that's actually a really good point because I was attending a webinar, I think maybe three weeks ago. It was hosted by SPE, and they were talking about how Canada actually has 3 different levels for carbon pricing. Alex, I don't know if you've seen that in your experience with sort of like the post-contract management for CCUS or geothermal. How exactly do those brackets play in, and is that really a big incentive?
That's something I haven't run into yet, Julian, but it's certainly, something that I will look after. And don't forget, I eventually want to transition from fossil fuels into geothermal. So, but it's still fairly new to me, but I'm very excited. When I went to Iceland in 2016 to attend I think it was the 3rd global geothermal, that really exposed my learning, firsthand learning. So from the Icelanders. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah, no, I just ran into it. I was looking back through my notes. It's like, oh yeah, that's actually really interesting. They have different brackets and incentives. So I was curious about your experiences on it.
Yeah, but that's something I'm gonna make sure that I monitor. Yeah, thanks.
What was that conference in Iceland?
It's going on now, and then there's a face-to-face component in October. Yeah, so if you're interested, you can
I'd
sign
love
up.
to.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
Yeah, there's a huge awareness now of geothermal, because what's driving it is Indonesia, Philippines, the United States, and California, Nevada, and so we're just bringing in the geothermal space here in Alberta. But as Lyle alluded to, it's going to be very, very challenging, But yet, I think we need to take one step at a time. And what I've learned from my second paper was that geothermal can provide base load to the solars and the wind renewables. But it's not just the electricity production that needs the geothermal can shine, but also in district heating, for example. I know that I think Nova Scotia is looking at one of the application of district heating. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well,
Oh, that's
they're
really
actually
interesting.
they're actually putting in one right now about a kilometer from my house, the old downtown Edmonton airport. Is being redeveloped into a green community, and it will be all ground source heating from a centralized geothermal plant. So,
Well, and one thing to keep in mind too, John Holbrook at TCU has been working with NSF grants in geothermal, and they're looking at geothermal wells from the point of view of storing energy from solar, so that it works as kind of a saltwater battery of some sort, using old abandoned wells for that. So more use for brine. Well, I want to mention too that we're almost out of time, so we'll have Rick, Fritz give some final words for us to give us some insights about the future. And I also want to mention that we're sorry that Michael had technical difficulties, Michael Campbell, with first Zoom and then electric surge. But what we'll do is we'll record him, and so you will get an email with a link to this recording, and also recording of Michael Campbell, and also any other resources that people want to share.
Yeah, I will have a few words to say about the nuclear power that haven't been raised here, and I'll be thinking of you when I put together my piece tomorrow. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. That I was really looking forward to that. So I was disappointed, but we'll be able to do a really nice job when there's stable internet and stable Zoom. So I'd like to turn the Zoom floor over to Rick Fritz.
Oh, thanks, Susan. So Michael was getting some really direct power, it sounded like that right there, if only he could store it. But good luck with that. I was, about this time last year, I was struck by lightning, the house, right on the house. That's a amazing experience. So I want to thank Susan, especially for all her work and for all the speakers. Great job, as always, putting this together. And I really, I learned a lot. I look forward to listening again to the recordings. We get so much, we get the politicians and so on tell us how easy everything is. And, it's nice to hear a dose of reality of what you're really facing out there in the environment. And it's that helps a lot. That helps figure out what's going on and helps AAPG. So again, thank you. And I really do look forward to the next one.
Go on.
Well, thank you. Really enjoyed it. Want to tell everybody thank you and look forward to seeing you again. Good night, everyone. Good
Thank
night.
you, Susan. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.